Hi and welcome to another video tutorial. In this video tutorial, what I'm going to be doing is showing you, introducing you to a different programming paradigm in Python. So Python supports something called object-oriented programming, and this is the paradigm which is most widely used in industry. So what do I mean by a programming paradigm? The programming paradigm is a way of programming. So much like if you have only programmed in a procedural or imperative style in the past, much like you write a Python file and you write instructions and then they're executed one after the other. That is one way of programming, and you can extend that by adding in functions and function calls, and that was before object-oriented programming came along, the way people wrote programs. But when programs started to become a lot more complicated, we needed a way of creating larger programs that was more convenient than just having many functions. So many modern languages support programming in an object-oriented style. So some examples are Python, Java, C++, and C#. And what object-oriented programming is we're encapsulating or bundling together data and functionality about some generic concept together in what's called a class. And this is all quite abstract, so what I'm going to be doing now is show you a practical example of how I can use object-oriented programming to create a company management program, a very simple company management program. Okay, so first of all, in our company we've got some employees. So what we're going to do is we're going to define an employee class, and what this is going to do is it's going to store information about an employee. It's going to store functions, and in a class we call these functions methods, which contain functionality related to what we might want to do to an employee. So we define a class with the keyword class, and we can call this class employee. And you can call your classes whatever you want, but by convention, you usually start a class name with a capital letter. Okay, so the first thing we're going to want to do is define the constructor for a class. And what the constructor is a method that's called whenever the class is created, and this sets up the object. So an object is an instance of a class. So a class is a template for creating objects of the same type. So we can use a class to create many different employees, and all those employees in the context of our program are called objects. So in Python, what we do to define an constructor is define a function called __init__, and in the parameters of this method, we're going to say self. And whenever we're creating methods inside a class in Python, we're going to want to add the self keyword as the first parameter. Whenever we're defining a method inside a class, we're going to want to add the self keyword in as the first parameter. We're then going to want to add the other information we're going to want to define whenever we're creating an employee. So this is going to be the employee's name, their salary, and their role. Okay, so in my constructor, what I'm going to do is I'm going to define some variables called attributes, or they're sometimes called fields. And the attributes or fields of a class are the data that is stored about that object. So we're going to store the name of the employee, the salary of the employee, the role of the employee, and the tasks that the employee has got to complete. So I've written this line here, self._name equals name. What this is basically saying is we're declaring a attribute or field called _name, and we're setting it equal to whatever name we pass into the constructor for this employee. So this is when we actually create an employee in our main program, we're going to pass the constructor a name for that employee. So we're going to set the attribute of the name attribute of the employee to whatever name we pass in. Okay, so I've done the same for the salary and the role, and those of you who have programmed in other object-oriented languages and are just watching this video to learn how to do it in Python will notice that there aren't any access modifiers in Python, and the way Python works is that everything is public. So from my main program I can access by one way or another any attribute of an object and find out what that what data is stored about that attribute of that particular object. So there aren't any access modifiers. This underscore here, by convention, one of the things that it's used for, we put an underscore before the name of a attribute or field. One of the things it's used for is to just differentiate between the attributes or fields and other variables. So that's just a convention, put an underscore before a attribute's name. Now I'm also going to define an attribute to hold the tasks that an employee has got to do, and this is going to be an empty list to start off with, and then we're going to later write a method to add tasks. Okay, so that's my constructor done. Next, what I'm going to do is define some getter methods, and what a getter method is, sometimes called a getter method, is a method that simply returns an attribute to the calling to the calling part of the program. So, for example, if I define a method in here which is called in the employee class, which is called getSalary. Remember, I've always got to pass self in into any method I create in Python, and I type return self dot underscore salary. What this will do is it will just return the value of that particular object's salary, so that particular employee's salary, to the calling part of the program. And we'll see how we can use getter methods in a later part of this video. So we could also say def got get name, so we're defining a getter method for the employee's name here. And it's good practice to define getter methods because even though in Python you can access any attribute of a class, so everything's public, in other object-oriented languages that's not the case. So it's good practice to use getter methods rather than directly accessing the attributes of a class. So I've defined a getter method for the role attribute, and I've defined a getter method for the tasks attribute. So now I'm going to want to add some actual functionality to my employee class, and the first bit of functionality I'm going to want to add is the ability to change the employee's salary. So I'm going to define a method in the employee class called changeSalary. And it's going to take the parameter self, which we have to pass into any method that we define in a class in Python. And it's also going to take another parameter, and I'm going to call that amount to change. And that's just going to be an integer, so the number that the amount by which we want to change the employee's salary. So the only line of this method here is going to be changing the employee's salary. I'm going to set the salary attribute to self.underscore_salary plus the amount to change. Okay, so that's given us a method by which we can change the employee's salary. So that's added some functionality to our class there. So now I'm going to define a method to add tasks to the employee class, and the simple way I'm going to do this is by using a while loop, and I'm going to write a while loop that allows the user to enter as many tasks as they want for this particular employee, and then say when they're done. Okay, so I've written my add tasks method, and all this does is it sets a variable done to false, and then it says while the variable done is false, it asks the user to enter a task and stores that in the task variable, It then appends that to the tasks list, which is the attribute tasks of employee. Then it asks the user whether they're done and stores their input in check done. If they entered yes, set done equal to true, and then it comes out of that loop and finishes the method. So that will provide a method by which we can add tasks to this task list. So the last method I'm going to add to my employee class is a method to show the tasks. So I'm going to call that show tasks. Okay, so all this method does is it iterates through the tasks list. So it does this block of code for every value in the tasks list, and what it does for every value in the task list is it prints out the position in the list it is, and then it prints out the value or the string that's stored in that position in the task list. So it will print out a list of tasks that the employee has to complete in order. Okay, so now what I need to do is write some code to use my employee class. What I'm going to do is define a function called addEmployees, and that function is going to take one parameter, and that's going to be a list of employees that we're going to add to. And it's worth noting that you can add objects, so instances of a class, to lists. So we're going to use a bit of code that's similar to the one here for adding tasks, except we're going to ask the user for all of the variables that we need to pass into the employee constructor, and then we're going to create an instance of the employee class, and we're going to add it to our employee list. Okay, so I finished creating my addEmployees method now. So all it does is it sets creating employees variable to true, and then it says while that creating employees variable is true, it will ask the user for the name of an employee, the role of an employee, the salary of an employee. Then this is the important object-oriented bit. We set a variable new employee to the return value of the employee function, and what this employee function is the constructor for this employee class. So what we're saying is we're going to pass the name that the user just entered, the salary that the user's just entered, and the role that the user's just entered into the employee constructor, and that's going to return from the employee constructor an instance of the employee class, or an object of the class employee, and it's going to store it in new employee. What we're then going to do is append that new employee to employee list. So we're going to add that new employee to our employee list. We're going to check if the user's done, and if they are done, we're going to come out of this loop, and what we can do then is we can return the employee list to the main part of our program. I'm now going to create another function which will allow us to give a employee some tasks. Okay, so what this function does, give tasks, is it takes in a list of employees, and it takes in a number an employee number, which I've just called employee, and what it does is it goes to it calls the addTasks method on the employee object at the position in the list or which this employee number that we're passing into the function here gives us. So essentially what we're doing is we're looking at a particular position in the list given by the employee parameter here, and we're saying call the addTasks method on the object that's at that point in the list. And that will allow us to add tasks for that particular employee, and then it returns the employee list to the main part of our program. What I'm going to do now is write one more function which will allow us to show the employees that are in our employee list. Okay, so I've written the show employees method, and what this is basically saying is for every employee in the list of employees, print their name, print their salary, print their role, print their task list. And this is using the getter methods that we defined in the employee class earlier. So getName will return the name of the employee, and that will be printed out in the heading here. And that's the same for the getSalary and getRole. They're just using the getter methods to get the value of that attribute. So get the value of that attribute stored about that particular employee, and print it out. And then the getTask method here is used to get the task list and then print out the task list. But what I'm starting to realise now is I can do this part of the program here, these three methods, in a better way. What I can do is actually create a class called Company, which will encapsulate these methods so that I don't have to think about them as a programmer creating an application about companies and employees. So if we define a class, company, and define a constructor, I'm going to define an attribute of that class as being the list of employees of that particular company. And you can start to see now how this is going to make our code a bit more organised, because we're not passing this employee list around willy-nilly all the time. We're actually storing this employee list at a particular place and then retrieving it from a particular company when we actually need it. So now let's indent these methods so that they're part of this company class, and let's modify them so they will work with this company class. So instead of passing an employee list here, I'm just going to pass in self, and then whenever I need the employee list, all I need to do, for example here where I need the employee list, all I need to do is say self dot underscore employee list. And now I don't need to return the employee list anywhere. Similarly here I can say self instead of employee list, and right here self dot underscore employee list. And then I don't need to return the employee list anywhere. And here the same thing occurs, where I can say self instead of employee list. Say self dot underscore employee list here, self dot underscore employee list here, same here, and the same there. So you can see that this is why object-oriented programming is used instead of just writing a load of functions, because what we can do is consider our programs similarly to how the real world is organised. So we can, so in the real world we've got a company, and that company can contain a load of employees that work for that company. And what I've done here is I've given myself the ability to, in my main program, create a company which contains a list of all the employees that that company that work for that company in employee list. And that employee list contains a list of instances of the employee class which contains information about those employees. And this is a very organised way of doing our programming, rather than just writing a list of functions and passing data around as parameters. We're actually able to pass data around in structures called objects, which are instances of classes, and then those objects store data in a very organised way, and we can retrieve that data using getter methods like I've done here with getName and getSalary. Okay, so let's write a brief main program that allows us to use our classes and see how they work. Okay, so you can see what I've done here is I've defined a main function which we're just going to call down here when we want to run our program. At the start of our program we create an instance of the company class and store it in the variable company. And what we then do is we repeatedly present the user with a menu until they say that they want to quit. And choice 1, add employees, will call the add employees method on the company. And choice 2, give tasks, will ask for an employee number and then call the give task method on on the company, and then choice 3 will call the show employees method on the company. And this is the really key takeaway from why we do object-oriented programming, is when I was writing this main program, I didn't need to know how the add employees method worked. I didn't need to know how the give tasks method works. I didn't need to know how the show employees method works. I just need to know that they're methods that I can use, and I need to know by reading the documentation that would be provided if this was a real set of classes. I just need to know what they do, what the functions return, if anything, and then I can use them in a program. Okay, so let's just run this briefly and see what it does. So I'm presented with employee manager, and I can choose an option. So I'm going to say add employees. Enter a name, the role, enter their salary, and I'm not done. I want to enter another employee, and I'm done entering my employees. Now what I want to do is give Bob some tasks. So I'm going to say give tasks, and enter an employee number. Enter a task. So I'm going to say write a script, because he's a programmer, and I'm not done. I'm going to enter another task. I'm going to say make coffee, and I'm done. Then I'm going to show my employees. Okay, and then we get, and then we can see we've got Bob, and his task list is write script, make coffee, and Jane. We've got the information we entered about Jane, and Jane hasn't got any tasks because we didn't allocate any tasks to Jane, and then we can just quit. So that's an object-oriented program. We created a class to store information about employees. We created a task to store information about a company, which contained an employee list. You could extend this to use files to save information about a company and employees. You could extend this to store more information about the company, so the company's name, for example. But this is just to give you a flavour of object-oriented programming and what some of the key terms are. So, data stored about a class, an object, so is called an attribute or a field. And then we create methods to provide functionality related to those specific objects. In later tutorial videos, what I'll be doing is going through some more complex concepts in object-oriented programming, such as things like inheritance. Okay, so I hope you found this tutorial video useful, and thanks for watching.